Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Beef Talk, brought to you by Teagasc in association with the Irish Farmers Journal and sponsored by the FBD Trust. I'm Adam Woods, Livestock Editor with the Irish Farmers Journal, and today's topic for discussion is dairy calf to beef production. I'm delighted to be joined by Donall Fahy, technician to the Dairy Calf to Beef project currently being undertaken here in Grange, and I'm going to be talking to Donall about the project, what's happening down there and the performance figures so far. I'll also talk to Dr. Bernadette Earley, who is a Principal Research Officer here in Grange, and I'll talk to Bernie about all the important points, I guess, in relation to health in beef systems. And I'm also joined by Alan Dillon, who is a beef specialist, currently specialising in dairy calf to beef production, and I'll talk to Alan about the Teagasc Dairy Calf to Beef project and how it's been implemented out on farms. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by JP Hamersley. I visited JP last week on his farm in County Tipperary, and we'll see what he had to say. Donall, there's a huge interest in dairy calf to beef systems out there on farms, and Teagasc has implemented a dairy calf to beef project down here on the farm. But before I start to talk to you, I visited you last week, and let's have a look to see what we talked about. Okay, I'm here with Donall Fahy, a technician on the dairy calf to beef project. Donall, the herd is grazing here behind you. Tell me a little bit about the work that's going on Dairy Calf to Beef project, what measurements you're taking, and what the overall aim of the project is.
So Adam, the Dairy Calf to Beef programme has a land area of 37.5 hectares here in Grange. At the moment, we're currently evaluating the performance of 3 genetic groups. So we have our Holstein Friesian group here behind us, and then we have 2 Angus groups. So our Holstein Friesian group here are sired by the top 4 high EBI sires, and then while our Angus yearlings are the progeny of bulls with divergent genetic merit, I suppose, for carcass weight and conformation score. And the whole idea here of the trial is to monitor the performance from arrival here on the farm through calf rearing right through to slaughter. So look, we have completed our first year of the trial. Our 2018 born calves, they were slaughtered in December 2019. Our Holstein Friesians, they had an average carcass weight of 305 kilos. They had a carcass conformation of O-, bordering P+, with a fat score of 3+. And they achieved a carcass output per hectare of 976 kilos. And I suppose through their lifetime to date, from once arrival on the farm till they were sold or slaughtered, they had a concentrate intake of 740 kilos following an 81-day winter finishing period. I suppose if we look at the performance of our Anguses, they had an indoor finishing period of 61 days. They had an average carcass weight of 297 kilos. They graded O equals with a fat score of 3+. And they gave us a carcass output of 949 kilos per hectare with an overall meal intake from arrival again right through to slaughter of 638 kilos. So I suppose really what we want to highlight is that this system, dairy calf to beef system, can achieve excellent performance through, I suppose, focusing on 3 key areas: calf health, calf rearing and grassland management.
Tell me a little bit about how you go about managing health on the farm, with particular emphasis on buying calves, and maybe even before you buy them, what happens here?
So as I said earlier, we purchase in 120 calves. And in order to get a representative sample, I suppose, of calf quality across the country, we purchase calves from 35 different farms. Obviously, then we have to implement a very good herd health plan. So calves arrive here at 21 days of age. Then 24 hours after arrival, they're vaccinated against pneumonia, and they receive their follow-up intermuscular shots, say, at 10 to 12 weeks of age. Calves are also treated then as a preventative for coccidiosis at 5 weeks of age, and then we also treat them for Clostridial disease before turning out to grass. And because we implement such a strict herd health plan that was devised obviously with our vets, our mortality to date for our 2020 born spring calves is less than 1%, and overall mortality for 2019 born calves was 1.4%. So I suppose, Adam, when I go out, I personally buy all the calves myself on the farm. As I said, in order to get a representative sample of calves across the country, that's why we purchase calves from so many different farms.
When you're in those yards, Donall, what are you looking for in terms of a healthy calf, or what sort of signs of a healthy calf are you looking for?
Well, But I always carry a thermometer with me in my pocket, so if I have any concerns that he's, say, has a high temperature, that's the first thing I'll do. I'll feel his the calf's navel as well to see is it swollen. Obviously then you're going to look for a calf that's bright and alert looking, that it's running around in the pen, and just make sure that there isn't a droopy ear or no discharge from the nasal.
What about a dosing programme for that first season at grass? What happens here on this trial?
So we regularly, throughout the first grazing season, we're constantly taking fecal samples in order to, I suppose, determine the parasite burden. And then when we exceed the threshold of 200 eggs per gram, then we consult our vets and we dose with the most suitable product.
With this year's calves, has that threshold been breached yet?
No, not yet, because I'll explain later as regards our grassland management what we're doing there in order to reduce our parasite burden.
So calves come in then at the end of that first grazing season. What happens during the winter months in terms of health in relation to these calves behind us?
So these calves behind us, they received, again, their booster vaccination at 6 months of age on the lead up to housing. Throughout the winter, look, they're again dosed, say 2 to 3 weeks after turn or while after housing. And then we will monitor egg samples again or take fecal samples again while they're being housed in order to determine to see did that dose actually wipe out whatever parasites were there.
Is that a fluke and worm dose?
A fluke and worm dose, yeah. And then obviously they're treated for lice then as well.
So Donall, with the stock going out for that second grazing season, the stock behind you here, what happens in terms of health treatments for those stock for that second grazing season?
So the cattle here behind me were turned out to grass on the 18th of March. They have received their clostridial vaccination, so in the prevention, say, of blackleg. They also have, we've taken 2 fecal samples already to determine the parasite burden, and they have been dosed already for parasites.
Thanks very much, Donall. Donall, great to see that work being undertaken down there on the farm. I guess Angus versus Holstein Friesian, the Hereford breeders at home will be saying why not a Hereford, and the Belgian Blue breeders will be saying why not Belgian Blue. Why choose Angus and Holstein Friesian?
I suppose, Adam, we decided to go with the Holstein Friesian and the Angus breeds for starting off with the trial. Number one, because they represent the main calf breeds coming from the herd. And I suppose number two, from looking from a trial point of view and a data analysis point of view, the Angus breed appealed to us because they had a greater selection of number of sires available as regards, so up for evaluation as regards carcass weight and conformation scores. When we are determining, say, our sire selection, we want to pick sires that are under a calving difficulty of 3.5%. So obviously they appeal to the dairy herd. So that was the main reason. Obviously going forward, look, we'll certainly evaluate a variety of other breeds, such as the Hereford, Limousin and Belgian Blue. But I suppose if we looked at some of them breeds at the minute, there's only 3 or 4 bulls available that have a calving difficulty of, say, of under 3.5%. Where at the minute with the Angus breed, we have about 12-13 bulls available to us that we're currently evaluating.
The fact that there's only 50% of dairy farmers currently registering the sire of calves, is that proven to be an issue for the trial, or how are you coming around that issue based on, sire? So for an ordinary farmer going out there, they're not able to, I suppose, select calves on these sires at the moment.
Yeah, Adam. We source our calves in conjunction, say, with ICBF. So we identify what sires we would like to evaluate. We worked in with ICBF and they identify, say, the insemination records. They contact the farmers for us and see then would they give consent, say, for myself to contact them and, say, possibly purchase the calves off them. We genotype the calves then as well to ensure from a data point of view that we are evaluating, say, the correct sires available to us. Going forward, that is something that definitely needs to be done down the line, that you would like to see genotyping. It hopefully being compulsory if possible going forward, that all calves from the dairy herd would be genotyped. So that would give confidence then to the beef farmer. And they could also then, I suppose, place a value on the calf going forward as its beef potential.
You've 2 sets of data gone through the system in terms of rearing 2 batches of calves in 2019 and 2020. You've completed some interesting work on calf milk replacer and feeding rates. Tell me a little bit about that work.
Yeah, so our 2018 born calves and our 2019 born calves, they were both reared on either 4 litres of milk replacer, so fed 2 litres morning and evening, or 8 litres of milk replacer, fed 4 litres morning and evening. and that was at a 12.5% solids. So say 125 grams of milk powder per 875 mils of water. That'll give you 1 litre of milk. So that's one thing that, just going back to calf rearing, you need to have the consistency in your milk replacer, because if you're having different percentage of solids, you're going to upset the calf's digestive system, and it's going to only lead to more problems as regards nutritional scores. But going back from looking at or evaluating our year 1 results, the calves that were reared on the 4 litres had a higher intake of concentrates. So they consumed 20 kilos less in milk powder, but they ate 25 kilos more in concentrates. And this didn't have any significant impact on calf performance. So then we observed the same results, say in 2019. Obviously, look, them cattle aren't killed yet, but for our 2020 born calves, we decided to go and rear all our calves on 4 litres of milk replacer a day.
So for farmers out there feeding calves or in a dairy calf to beef production system, you're saying that the lower rate of milk replacer is more beneficial. There's no negative effect on weight gains, and it's obviously cheaper to rear them.
Well, look, now we only have based our results on 1 year's data. Obviously, look, going forward, we'll have our 2019 born cattle available to slaughter. But I suppose what we did want to find out, is there alternatives, options available to rear calves? And I suppose one of the possible reasons that we are looking at as well, the calf undergoes a transition going from pre-ruminant stage to ruminant stage, say at 4 to 8 weeks of age. And during that phase, you want to encourage the intake of solid feed by the calf to ensure or to promote rumen development. And we do this by offering access to ab-lib concentrates and fibre, so as in straw. And I suppose that's one thing that we did find. The 4 litre calf, or the calf that was reared on the 4 litres, had a greater intake of concentrates. And by achieving that process correctly, like say, it's going to minimise your overall stress level associated, or say at weaning time, and maintain performance then during the first grazing season.
Moving on to purchasing calves, you're the man on the ground, you're out there purchasing calves in farmers' yards. Any advice for other farmers out there that will be buying in calves? What are you seeing out there, and what are you looking for when you walk into a shed of calves?
So number one, anyways, you definitely want to find out the genetics of the calf. So look at the cow type, find out what's the cow type on the herd, whether the calf is bred by a stock bull or an AI bull, and what's the terminal traits of that bull. So as regards its carcass weight, which is very important, and its conformation score. Number two, then you'd want to be looking at, say, you want to find out the general herd health of the plant. So what are the cows vaccinated for? When you're buying in calves, you want to minimise the amount of disease coming into the herd as well. So even if the cows are vaccinated against scour, that's a huge bonus. I suppose physically then, looking at the calf, you want to see the calf, is he a bright, alert looking, he clear eyes, his ears are upright, any signs of scour, how's he breathing, is he breathing normally? I always carry a thermometer with me myself. If I have any doubts, check his thermometer, at least you know then. Say whether the calf will give you a good idea whether the calf is healthy or not. I suppose one little trick is if you pinch the skin and it bounces back straight away, it shows that the calf is hydrated. So that's a huge bonus.
So some really good advice there. Just moving on from that, if I'm a farmer farming in County Roscommon, for example, I have 100 acres, I want to buy in 100 calves, what would you be saying to that farmer as the 3 most important things that he has to do to make a successful dairy calf to beef production system, and let's face it, make money?
I suppose the most important thing is that you want to have a system in place. You want to plan ahead, you want to know exactly what route you're going to go down, whether you're going to go down buying in heifers and finishing them, say, at 20 to 22 months of age, or buying in steers and finishing them at under 24 months of age. You want to be able to buy a calf for a system rather than working a system around the calf. Because if you don't, it needs a bit of thought and planning put into it before you purchase anything, because the last thing you want to do is end up with different age groups of stock around the farm, which could easily run into difficulty then, say, as regards housing, obviously slurry storage, and your winter feed. That, I think, is definitely the most important thing, is to have a final destination or plan in place as to where the cattle are going to go or what route you're going to take with them. Number two, then again, is coming back to your calf rearing and your calf health and nutrition. you want to create an environment, we'll say, with the highest standards of animal welfare, so that the calf can express its normal behaviour in that environment, so you can identify the abnormal. So as regards in terms of sickness, and early prevention obviously is key, because you want to keep the animal performing, the calf performing from day one. The minute that he arrives on the farm, you want to keep him performing, gaining weight. You want to avoid any setbacks. That's definitely the most important thing. And I suppose it's kind of getting the basic right. If you go and milk or get your milk replacer and have that at the same consistency, so if we said the 12.5% solids, that's going to avoid any nutritional upsets. You want to have a good bedding under calves. And again, it's just about doing the basic things right. Obviously looking at them twice a day. That's one thing that we found with feeding morning and evening. It gave us a great chance to identify, say, any calves that were showing signs of sickness. If you had a slow drinker in the morning, at least you were coming back looking at him in the evening time to see had he improved. And if you hadn't, take a temperature and you could take the corrective action. It's just about getting the basics right. And then if we look at our grassland management, everybody knows that grass is the cheapest form of feed available. So you want to maximise your weight gain from grass, both in your first season at grass, your second season, and obviously through your winter period.
Thanks, Donall. It's about getting the simple things right, and that's what it's all about. Bernie, if I move on to you, Donall has talked about health and health being absolutely critical to these dairy calf to beef systems. I suppose if we take it from the very beginning, Bernie, you know, a lot of people talk about colostrum. How important is colostrum at the very, very beginning? If we go from birth to grave, basically, if we start at the beginning, how important is colostrum?
Well, if you think about colostrum, it's going to be the first milk that the calf will be fed. So the importance of that feed, it's really like liquid gold to the calf in terms of setting up its immunity. And if you want a vaccine then to work well in a calf, it's really to target that immunity. So that starts really from as soon as the calf is born. If we just look at some of the figures like that are reported from the Department of Agriculture recently, there between 32 to 34% of respiratory infections are associated with mortality and 22% with GIT infections. So you mainly either finding, let's say, the identification of Salmonella, E. coli, you know, those pathogens that will cause GIT infections, as well as the respiratory agents. If we also think of the colostrum, we have to consider the Animal Health Ireland guidelines, the 1, 2, 3. So it's the first feed of colostrum within 2 hours and feed at least 3 litres. And that really is the golden rule in terms of, you know, enhancing the immunity of the calf.
I know in recent years you've looked at maybe the passive immunity that the calf gets, would say, from that colostrum. Yes. Is there a difference out there on farms, maybe with colostrum quality or the level of immunity that the calf attains from getting that colostrum?
Yes, over 2 years or so ago we had a project running, and we collected blood samples from calves on farms, from dairy farms and from beef farms, and assessed the passive immunity. There was over 3,200 beef and over 5,500 dairy calves on the study, and we found that really the failure of passive transfer of immunity was equivalent to about 64% in dairy and beef, and that was based on one test we were using as well, which was used as well by the department, was the zinc sulfate turbidity test. So there is certainly room for improvement there in following very closely that 1, 2, 3 guideline. If you think of the calf and of feeding the calf, there are published studies to show that the cost of failure of passive transfer of immunity to a dairy calf is a cost of 60 to 120 euros per calf, and for a beef calf it can be 80 to 140 euros.
So really it pays on farm to put huge emphasis on getting that colostrum into the calf, and I guess from a dairy calf to beef production point of view, we've no way of controlling that. And maybe Donald talked about knowing the sources where you buy the calves, and I guess that's really, really important, that you know that it's a good management on that dairy farm, that there's colostrum going into those calves, because if there's not, you're going to pay later on in the life cycle.
Yes, and on the farm, the farmer has available to him tests that he can use to check colostrum quality. There's a colostrometer, there's also the Brix refractometer. So a guide really is if you place a sample of colostrum on the Brix refractometer and it reads a level of 22%, then you know that in that colostrum there's 50 milligrams per mil of immunoglobulin, which is the antibody that the calf needs. So if you can get that into the calf, that amount of colostrum into the calf, that's a sure thing that you're going to have enhanced immunity. And as regards the timing or the feeding of the colostrum, regardless of whether it's by a tube feeder or by, from a bottle with the teat, the amount of time can vary. Let's say maybe 5 to 7 minutes of tube feeding versus with a bottle it can be something like 17 minutes. It's time well spent, really to enhance that calf chance of survival.
Animal welfare is the new buzzword around Europe, and I guess disbudding. To talk to me about disbudding, I suppose best practice and maybe some of the research you have worked on here in Grange, and maybe how that's changing a little.
Yeah, just to, I suppose, qualify that, Adam, the current legislation is that under 2 weeks of age, a farmer can disbud a calf without using a local anaesthetic. And over 2 weeks, between 2 to 28 days of age, there is a product available that the farmer can use to disbud a calf. I mean, everybody knows about it. It's a product called adrenocane. But it's really determining when the buds are available or when they're available actually to remove. Because we found that when we measured the bud height as well as the diameter in suckler bred calves as well as in dairy calves, we find that there's a greater diameter in the dairy calf and a bud height than there is in the beef calf. So the present guidelines are based really on age, but we would say that the recommendation should be based more so on the actual size of the bud. And if you think of a 10 cent coin, it's roughly about 20 millimetre. If you look at the age of a calf at disbudding between 14 to 28 days of age, for a dairy calf it can be around 17 millimetre diameter, slightly smaller for a beef calf. But the important thing with disbudding is that you're using a disbudder tip. They come with different sizes. So it has a concave structure on it to fit over the horn bud. But it's important when you're removing the horn itself, the little bud, that you remove some of the horn producing cells around the bud so to have complete removal of the bud itself.
It's always a debate out on farms as regards remove the bud completely or just, we'll say, that ring down, we'll say, burnt around in a ring. Have you completed any research on that?
Yeah, we would say it's best to remove the bud, and we usually will remove it and then just spray over with a silver spray. And generally there's no problem, but I would recommend, and it is part of our SI, it's in law as well, that we must use a local anaesthetic, but it is quite effective. The important thing as well is to have a dehorning crate to actually restrain the calf properly. The administration of the anaesthetic itself, it is something that you can acquire with practice. You are actually producing a nerve block which is around between the eye and the base of the horn. So you're causing a nerve block in what is known as the cornual nerve. But it is quite effective in terms of, causing the animal to lose that sensation of pain around the site.
In the last couple of years, you talk about pain. We've seen some farmers move to using painkillers along with, we'll say, anaesthetic. Do you think that should be used in the future along with the anaesthetic?
It's certainly a consideration. They're, to use the word, they're cheap, but they're quite effective. If you use them, they will keep the pain response reduced for between 24 to 36 hours. And it's actually the inflammation around the procedure itself that causes the pain. So if you can minimise that pain, certainly it's much better. Anything that will reduce the stress, it also will have less impact on the calf's health as well. So it won't be a trigger for any type of pneumonia to be triggered as such.
You mentioned pneumonia there, and I guess with vaccination, is vaccination a must in these dairy calf to beef systems for them to be successful, or what's your opinion on that?
I think going back to, let's say, the calf enhanced immunity at birth, and I think that the vaccine then will target that immunity. But there's no point going in with the vaccine unless you have a good, well-developed immune system in the calf. Certainly they are of benefit, and I think Donall would say that as well in what we're observing here at Grange. It is a must, but the immunity must kind of be up to...
So if there are other issues on the farm, it won't cure all issues by vaccinating.
No.
You still need to have good, we'll say, technical efficiency on the farm. Yep.
And then with vaccines, it's so important to follow the procedures around dosing or around storage, dosing, and the type of pathogen then that you're targeting with the vaccine.
If you are vaccinating, is it, we'll say, as a young calf, or you better vaccinate as a weanling, or is it very farm specific as to where those issues occur?
Well, we would certainly in Grange here, we're moving in very young with the young calves, like the bought-in calves, and you certainly can see the benefit of it. We're also doing some work on respiratory disease in weanlings as well as in young bought-in calves. So we're using some of the newer technology that's available. We're using it here. It's out of Grange. We have developed it. And we're looking at the types of bacteria, let's say, that are present within an infection if the calf has pneumonia, and to compare that with the healthy calves. And that's showing up some pathogens, bacterial pathogens, that have never been identified previously. So it's a culture-independent method, and it's giving us a very good idea of what pathogens, in particular bacteria, are associated with disease. And it is hoped then that using this technology you're going to have a more directed antibiotic that will target the infection, because at the moment we will find that most of the antibiotics are targeting the Mannheimia hemolyticas and the Pasteurellas, those type of bacteria. In addition to that, we're using ultrasound technology. I have a postdoc working with me here on a large project. It's a link with the USDA in the States as well as with Northern Ireland. So we're using an ultrasound device. It's a little small transducer probe. It's 8 megahertz. And we can look at the pattern or the changes that are happening in the lungs of a calf as it develops pneumonia. It can be used pen side. You need to shave an area over the lung itself with it.
Is this a veterinary diagnostic tool or a farmer diagnostic tool?
It's probably more veterinary, but you would probably see more vets using it in the future. So you scan both the left and the right side of the animal, and if you look at some of the images that you see from it, you see what is known as a pleural line, which is the actual lining of the lung itself. So that appears as a white line in the image. And it's known as the glide sign, because as the animal is breathing, the line will change. And then if you look at an animal with a lesion, then you'll see where there's less passage of the sound through the tissue, so you can actually identify lesions. And some lesions we've identified are, as from 1 centimetre to 2 centimetre in diameter. Of interest, we looked at the dairy calves this spring when they were coming in from part of Donald's and Nicky's work, and we will find respiratory infections, but it's mainly associated with some lung lesions as well. So in those calves, we were able to pick up early signs of lung lesions and or more consolidation, let's say, of the lung. But once we move in with an antibiotic and with a non-steroidal as well, you can actually get a very good prognosis or treatment of that, so it doesn't develop into a full-blown pneumonia.
Thanks, Bernie. I guess health is really one of those central cogs in the wheel of any livestock system, and dairy calf to beef is no different. I'm going to move on now to Alan Dillon, beef specialist with Teagasc, currently specialising in dairy calf to beef production. Before we talk, Alan, earlier this week we visited JP Hamersley, farming down just outside Latton in County Tipperary, about his dairy calf to beef system. Let's see what he had to say. Okay, JP, we're here on your farm just outside Latton in County Tipperary. We've caught a moment just between the showers, but we won't complain about the rain. Tell me a little bit about your farm and your farming system.
I suppose we're farming 37 hectares here. It's a calf to beef system. What we do is we buy in calves at 4 weeks of age and finish them through to 28, 30 months. I suppose this has been working quite well. I suppose now, since joining the Green Acres group, what we've done now is looking at changing our system slightly, where we'll produce 50% of our cattle will go to 24-month system, and the other 50% will go 28 months. So as part of that, then this year I have bought an additional calves this year, so now we're going to be running 70 calves this year.
What sort of breeds are you working with at the moment?
It's mostly a British Friesian. I'm being very lucky actually that I have a local dairy farmer that I've been dealing with for years now. So he's a very good farmer, and he's really kind of focused on having a dual functional cow. So I'm getting a good British Friesian, about 45% British Friesian still. So that's made a huge difference now to be able to get that great quality calf. You know the person, and at least you know that they're good.
So you know the health status of the calf. Are you buying all your calves from one source, and is there benefits in doing that?
I find it, yeah, it's great now to have that, because what I'd be doing is I'd be buying in batches of calves, in 10 and 12 calves at a time. For my system, I'm working full time. I work over in Boston Scientific as a scientist, so I need to have a very simple system. So by getting in 10 or 12 calves at a time, it means I can start working with them up along, feeding them milk, and then kind of I'll be getting in the next batch in a week or two after that. So it does work well for me in that an hour or two in the morning, an hour in the morning will get me going, and an hour in the evening. So that's how it works well.
So I guess that brings me on to the next question. Why dairy calf to beef, and why not sucklers, why not milking cows, or why not buy in good continental Charolais store cattle down here?
We've done kind of a few different things here. Years ago this was a dairy farm, and then I had to switch to suckler cows then. I found kind of with having full-time commitments of a job, the calf to beef system worked better. And it was very important to me to have a good work-life balance.
So labour and time, family time is important here, that,
Exactly.
that you make time for other things aside from farming.
And that's the thing now, and I suppose the main focus of the farm here is to run the farm with 17 to 18 hours per week on the average. And that's kind of what we've always kind of focused on. I don't want to have a system where we're not seeing the family because we're working too hard and stuff. So having that kind of controls in place has made a huge difference.
In terms of performance, maybe on the farm this year, maybe in last year, can you go through some of your performance figures, or what you're targeting in terms of live weight gains for young stock and for finishing stock?
Well, I suppose kind of one of the key things kind of as part of the Green Acre programme, Sean would have gone through kind of what are the key targets for profitability on this. And he was kind of looking at it and he said, what we need to do is increase the live weight gain of the cattle that we're finishing at the moment, but also actually to increase the output as well. And that was kind of where the 24-month system was working out. But on our current system, the 28 to 30-month system, the target is to have a carcass weight of 350 kgs. At the moment, we're at 331. So I suppose we have a bit of work to do on that. But one of the promising signs, I suppose, from this year is that our cattle coming out of the sheds, we had a target of 335 for our weanlings, coming out of the shed. So we hit 337, so we're well on target to meet that. So I think by the time we get to finishing in those calves, we'll be hitting the 350.
What sort of other things along the way are you working on to bring? I suppose you have 20 kilos of carcass there to make up. What sort of other things? So it's a heavier weanling, maybe going back out for the second grazing season. What other things are you doing to try and hit that heavier carcass weight?
I think a lot of it is down to the grass management. Back in 2015, 2016, I'd have really thought of I wanted to improve the farm. And I remember one of the key things was when I was at one of the Grange open days, I'd have seen a poster actually there, and it kind of showed a ladder, and it kind of said the first step of the ladder was soil fertility. So that was kind of one thing with reps and stuff throughout the years. We've always actually had that in good shape. So then it's kind of infrastructure. So what we had was we had a certain level of paddocks, about 21 paddocks from the dairy farm. So what I would have done was I'd have calculated what was the daily demand of maybe 60 cattle. Worked it out then that I needed the paddocks to be around 0.7, 0.8 of a hectare. So we broke down the farm into all the little paddocks, and we would set up kind of permanent gateways with temporary wires on that to make it easier for spreading fertilizer and all that. And then kind of the next part of that kind of program, I suppose, that I saw on that board was grass management. So I would have bought a plate meter there a few years ago. But I suppose it was only since I joined the Green Acres group that I really started using it all the time. And that's kind of made a huge difference on that. And then I suppose finally the step was reseeding. And one of the interesting things on the farm is with all the other building blocks in place, we've been able to produce 10 tonnes per hectare on permanent pasture. But last year what we did now was we went off and reseeded 20 acres. So I suppose that we're going to be bringing it to the next stage. But I suppose it's having all the building blocks in place made a huge difference actually for us.
Finally, we're standing in front of a really good group of I suppose, British Frisian bull calves. In terms of where the dairy industry is going and maybe reducing beef traits in the dairy cow, do you think there'll be an issue in the future getting these calves behind us? Maybe not just for you, but for the industry as a whole. And do you think quality calves within that dairy calf to beef will be an issue going forward?
I suppose, yeah, it is probably going to be an issue. For myself, I think I'm fairly okay on that one at the moment. But I suppose, yeah, it is a concern if you don't have an animal that can be brought or where you can get a carcass up at 350 at 28, we're going to run into trouble. I suppose even working with kind of my advisor Joe Hand and stuff, we've been kind of looking at kind of what other ways you can kind of work on that, and even seeing what the challenges, what some other farmers in the group have had.
JP, thanks very much for talking to me this morning. Okay, Alan, great to see a farmer on top of his game down there, and JP certainly seems to be on top of his game. Alan, I suppose lots of farmers ask us this question every year in relation to profitability of suckler beef systems versus dairy calf to beef systems. Give us a straight answer. Which is more profitable?
Well, Adam, I suppose what we've seen over the years is that if you take a suckler to beef system and compare it to a dairy calf to beef system, both run at the same level of efficiency, high levels of efficiency. That's, you're ticking all the boxes, you're utilising your grass, good silage, watching the genetics and health. There's no major difference in terms of profitability. What we've seen is the top suckler to beef farmers and the top dairy calf to beef farmers run at 2.5 plus livestock units to the hectare can achieve gross margins of 1,000 to 1,500 euros per hectare, net margin of 500 to 1,000 euros per hectare. And this has been the case for a long number of years now. With suckler to weanling systems, okay, you're dealing with a lower level of output. And it's probably fair to say that a higher stocked dairy calf to beef system, which is easier to achieve in dairy calf to beef, will achieve a higher level of profitability. But when you're comparing like with the full system integrated right through to finish, ballpark, the profit levels are very similar.
I guess I'm from West Cavan, and some of the Teagasc research would point to 10 tonne of grass to the hectare, and I can run 2.8, we'll say, steers to the hectare in terms of finishing. I'm never going to get to 10 tonne to the hectare of grass. Is there a danger that we go out there with this blanket approach that we can do this, and the research shows that we can do this, and that's tried to be applied on farms, for example in West Cavan, and we're really worse off than when we started?
Well, I suppose, look, while we do have, I suppose, one blueprint maybe that is spread out across the country, it's up to every individual farmer maybe to take elements that might suit themselves. In terms of look, you're not going to maybe grow 15 tonnes of dry matter per hectare in poorer parts of the country. You're not going to be able to get out as early as we might like due to weather restrictions, etc. We had a very bad February this year. There was no way you could get grazing in heavier parts until after Patrick's Day, and that's fair enough. But I suppose we do have, elements we can take in terms of you can still improve your sward quality, improve silage quality. We can achieve probably on most farms up to 2 livestock units per hectare in terms of output levels. You won't hit that gross margin of 1,000 to 1,500 euros per hectare, but you can certainly be a lot better off than you were maybe in 800 to 1,000 euros per hectare gross margin. That's 300 to 500 net. So I suppose while there's elements most farmers can take and they can implement on their own farm.
Is there a role for dairy calf to beef systems to bolt on to maybe existing suckler systems as a way maybe of increasing output as opposed to maybe increasing suckler cow numbers, or do you think both would go hand in hand and run alongside each other?
Yes, I think there is. There's definitely a role for it, and I suppose the big benefit is, if you want to increase your suckler numbers, there's a lot of infrastructure needed on your farm in terms of a lot of extra housing. You may need to improve maybe your handling facilities. It may be an issue maybe with a lot of part-time farmers with regards labour or calving cows. The benefit of the dairy calf to beef is maybe, I suppose, you have that option that, it's a more routine job. You feed them in the morning, you feed them in the evening. You pick when the calves arrive on the farm. There is less needed in terms of animal housing. They're a smaller animal. There's a lot of sheds that could be adapted to rear calves in the spring that may be existing on farm. There's probably a role there, and it's been done in previous programs like Better Farm program, that to some level of degree of success, where farmers have added this in as maybe a bolt-on to maybe try and increase output without major extra investment on farm, and some farmers are quite happy with that role.
We've heard a lot about calf quality in the last couple of years, about dairy farmers using better bulls, especially towards the beef end of the season. But Donald's research would point to that there isn't a huge difference between Holstein Friesian genetics and Angus genetics. What do you see there, or do you see it as a problem in the future in terms of the genetics that dairy farmers are using?
Yeah, I suppose that question, I suppose, is always been put out there. And what we've seen, we're working on the Teagasc Green Acres programme on the dairy calf to beef, and it's shown very similar results to what Donall has shown. In terms of, okay, we've a slide there showing first off is calf purchase price, where we can see that, look, the Holstein Friesians are costing about €60 a head. The Herefords and Angus probably 150 to 180 a head or thereabouts. Year on year. But if you look at the next slide then, based on what the cattle actually make when they're killed, the Holstein Friesians actually on our programme actually outperforms the Anguses and the Herefords in terms of money brought back in. They would actually have brought in extra revenue. So really, a lot of it, what we're seeing, is down to what you touched on earlier in terms of just 50% of the sires not being registered on dairy farms. We've seen that as well, and the calves have been bought in on this programme. And from what we have seen bought in, there's a huge number of bulls being used with negative carcass values. So we're seeing, some Herefords, Anguses, etc., which are the predominant ones being bought, figures of -5, -6 plus for or thereabouts for carcass values, which means they're actually worse than a Friesian in terms of their carcass traits. And that's probably why, you're often better off maybe at the minute, if you're not sure of getting a good beef bred animal, at let's say 150 to 180 euros, whatever you want to pay. The Holstein Friesian, where you maybe have a better idea of what you're buying at 50 to 60 euros, might be better value for the farmer. You've more of an idea of what you're getting. You've more of I suppose, maybe an idea of what spec they're going to fall into. The problem is with some of the beef bred animals, if they come from poor quality sires, is that they're falling out with the spec that you expect that's what you're paying for day one.
But I guess, have dairy farmers to step up to the mark here in terms of what they've been doing for the last couple of years? It's been just to put cows in calf. They haven't been looking at the beef traits at all of the beef bulls that they're using to sire, which is the next generation of beef calves. And do we need to communicate that to dairy farmers a lot better?
We do, yes, and there has to be buy-in from both sides, and that the beef farmer has to know what he's looking for in terms of sourcing a calf. He has to know that, right, he wants to be a calf sired by a good beef bull with a positive carcass traits of maybe 10 to 15 kilos, etc., reasonable conformation. But also, look, he can't expect anything too extreme from the dairy side. The dairy farmer has to maintain his productivity. He has to get his cow back in calf relatively easy and achieve his peak milk production. But yes, in terms of the dairy farmers do have to step up to the mark and start using better quality bulls. We're seeing, as we said, a lot of these bulls are of poor quality. In some cases, there's no sire registered. We don't know what kind of a bull calf we're getting back. And this is reflective in terms of the data that we're generating on this Green Acres programme. In terms of that, we're showing that, look, if you're not dealing with a good beef sire, it's very questionable in terms of the money that's being paid.
Jersey calves, is there any farmer participating in the programme working with Jersey calves, and is there a profitable route to them?
We had one or two farmers that may have bought in a small number of Jersey cross calves.
By accident or by design?
By design, I suppose, initially before we started with them. I think it was just that they wanted to up numbers fast, and it was seen as a way of just getting them in without actually spending a lot of money. But they've moved back out of that system very fast. Realistically, they're not leaving money. And what we're seeing is that, look, if you take it what those Jersey cross calves can come into when they're slaughtered, you're talking about a carcass of maybe anything from 220, 230 up to 250 or 60 carcass. They're going to be a P grade. That's guaranteed almost out of them. Really, that's going to come in at current beef prices in at around 750, 800 euros max. The cost of production that we're seeing is around, for most, I suppose, male calves coming off the dairy herd, finished the steers, around 950 to 1,000 euros per head. So that means you're going to be at a significant loss coming in with a Jersey cross. Really, there isn't, at current beef prices, there is no profitable route to take them through to steer finish. The only options are that some kind of a subsidy comes on them for farmers to take them. I don't know where that would actually come from. Or the other option is that dairy farmers, if there is a problem with moving these calves off farm, would keep them until a later stage, maybe at 9 to 10 months of age or later, and give them away for free at that stage. And then the beef farmer has some hope of maybe making a small margin on them, but it's very tight.
A subsidy, dairy farmers keeping them until 10 months, what's the likelihood of that happening?
Look, it's probably not going to happen until a problem arises in terms of moving these calves off the farm. And if a problem does arise, look, they will have to look at their options and see what, who's going to pay for this. I mean, they don't have the facilities to keep the calves on the farm. They don't have the labour to look after the calves in a lot of cases, so the calves have to move. So if they're going to continue down this route of breeding poor quality animals of poor beef genetics, look, they're going to have to maybe do some kind of a deal where maybe even a beef farmer might be paid to rear the calf, or someone else might rear them and then move them on at a later stage free of charge. But at the minute, it's been getting away with, but will it stay that way down the line? I don't know.
You're working with farmers on dairy calf to beef systems all across the country. Where do you think the biggest knowledge gap is with those farmers? Is it in relation to calf rearing? Is it relation to genetics? Is it relation to grassland management? Is it relation to finishing animals? Where do we need to work the hardest there with those farmers to bring them up to speed on dairy calf to beef systems?
I would say, I suppose, Adam, if you're to break it down, there's probably three main areas, I would say. The first is, I think, the health side of things. We're seeing a lot of health problems with these calves coming onto farms. It's particularly, and it's relating back to what Bernie said earlier there, in relation to pneumonia problems. We're seeing a lot of calves, especially where they're coming out of marts or coming from dealers' yards, etc., with the likes of pneumonia setting in at an early stage. This is leading to high vet costs, it's leading to some deaths on farm, and poor thrive for those calves that do survive. So one thing, we're trying to implement vaccination programs across the board on farms for calves that have been dropped in. They're coming from different environments, been dropped into one yard, they're mixing after a certain length of time when they arrive on the farm, and this is what's leading to problems. So we would try and encourage buying as much as possible from one source, or near enough to one source, and also vaccination programs. The next thing is, I suppose, the rearing stage, and up to the first 12 months of the calf's life is where most of the money has been lost on these farms. And I suppose it's, bringing them in, ensuring that they're on a good plain nutrition when they arrive on farm with no setbacks, good quality milk replacer. That transition out to the first season at grass is where a lot of condition has been lost as well, that they're moving them maybe too soon off milk, not having the rumen properly developed before they go out to grass, and then it's managing them at grass for that first grazing season, especially where someone maybe is more used to a suckler animal, a suckler cow and calf, or maybe a store to beef system. It's a very different management practice getting that calf through the first grazing season. And then silage quality, a lot of wheelings do very little if any weight gain in the first winter, and trying to improve that silage, that you've their silage cut by the middle of May, 75 DMD, and it's maybe a small amount of ration over the winter to achieve that close to half a kilo a day live weight gain.
I guess the importance of livestock exports, and maybe I'll bring in everybody on this question. Every year we see, if we have a reduction in calf exports 2 years down the road, we see a very poor beef price. How important is livestock exports, or calf exports in particular, to the profitability of these systems?
Yeah, it's more a question, I suppose, for the entire beef enterprise as much as it is calf to beef, I suppose. Look, it's very important, I suppose, from both sides. I suppose for the dairy farmer, puts a floor under the calf price probably in the spring, but also for the man that's taking what calves are left on to finish. There's the bones of 1 million dairy calves taken through to finish every year in Ireland. It's there to prop up the beef price, I suppose, and keep a bit of competition in the market, that there's always that outlet for farmers to offload calves live. And look, it's probably a very important concept going forward as well.
Bernie, there's all those questions maybe asked around welfare and livestock exports, and I suppose long term, can we continue to rely on those high level exports? You've conducted some research and it looks very favourably at livestock exports and the welfare of those animals that have been exported. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of extensive research over a period of time. The findings of the research as well contributed to the EU regulation which was put in place. So that's at a national as well as an international level. It will come up from time to time in the debate, the welfare of the animals within Ireland, let's say, from Ireland to the continent, and then outside EU, let's say, we went as far as Lebanon with a load of animals, or a shipload of animals. Always with our studies, we've always maintained control animals non-transported, either on site here or on different farms. So we have a direct comparison between non-transported with transported. It's very important to focus on that in view of transport, because you may not be comparing like with like unless you have proper controls in the study. We found no adverse effect on the welfare of the animals. Actually, the transport of the animals out of Ireland is very superior, from Ireland to, let's say, France and Italy. Perhaps compared with some of the practices maybe within the EU, but that's not for me to police that. But certainly it's one it's very topical. It is managed very well. The Department of Agriculture ensure that if there's any problems with it, they're always investigated. but we have to achieve, like, you know, or make sure that we're, you know, animals are prepared well for transport, that even the way the driver will drive the truck, that he has received the proper training. But there's a whole lot of parties involved with it, but it's there, and as Alan said as well, it's part of our marketing structure, and if it's done well, there's absolutely no problem with it.
It's great to have that research to back up, we'll say, in the future as regards livestock exports. Donal, if we move down to the yard, what's happening on the dairy calf to beef project at the moment, and how are you for grass on the farm at the moment?
At the minute, no, Adam, we're okay for grass. We did experience their short deficit, I suppose, say 2 weeks ago or so. We're feeding out surplus bales that we had harvested in, say, early May, that say bales that were taken from paddocks where growth had exceeded demand. They made up 50% of the diet. So we're doing 12-hour allocations. We're feeding out along the strip wire.
You've just weighed though, and it hasn't had an effect on the weight gain of those animals. Tell me a little bit about the weight gain of those animals so far.
Yeah, so our yearling cattle, they were weighed on a week ago, say. Our yearlings, our Holstein Friesians were 422 kilos. They've gained 1.4 kilos since turnout. And our Anguses were 416, gaining as well 1.4 kilos. So it had no impact on performance, and I suppose that's one of the real things that we have learned this year was the importance of removing the surplus bales on time, because when we did face a feed shortage, we were able to go back in and feed them out without having to feed concentrate.
Aims and targets for the next couple of weeks, what's happening down there?
At the minute, we've all calves are out to grass at the minute. We hope to soon cut our second cut silage now once the weather clears up. That'll reduce down our demand again, so we'll have that after grass available to our calves. And then obviously the main priority is to keep our yearling bullocks performing and hopefully achieve an excess of 0.9 kilos throughout the entire grazing season. They'll be housed, say, mid-October, early to mid-October. They'll go on their finishing diet, and the majority will be gone by Christmas time.
Good stuff. Alan, moving out to the country, what sort of issues are you encountering out there on the programme farms at the moment?
It depends on where you are in the country, I suppose. If you're dealing with the eastern side, there was a huge level of drought for the last month or 6 weeks or thereabouts. That's alleviated now. I suppose silage yields are back significantly enough on a lot of the programme farms, what we're seeing. I suppose grass growth was poor enough through the main silage growing season for the first cut, earlier in the year. So hopefully with this bit of rain that came, we're going to be dealing with a much improved second cut in the next couple of weeks. Some farmers have already taken their second cut even and may do a third cut. So I suppose overall on farm things aren't too bad, and cattle are thriving quite well. There's cattle being killed off grass now at the minute, and I suppose performance is exceeding our expectations in terms of fat scores and weight gains over the last number of months. So overall, price is back on where we thought it was going to be, obviously, but nothing we can do about that. But programme farmers are, I suppose, moving in the right direction, and we are expecting profit monitors to be increased this year again on last year.
That's it for today, folks. My thanks to Alan, my thanks to Bernie, and my thanks to Donal. Don't forget to log in tomorrow at 12 o'clock, where Agribusiness Editor with the Irish Farmers Journal, Lorcan Allen, will be discussing everything in relation to climate change, sustainability, biodiversity, and greenhouse gas emissions. We'll speak to Teagasc researchers and specialists here in the studio, but we'll also visit farms in Waterford, Cork, and we also visited the ICBF Gene Ireland Progeny Test Centre in Tully to find out what's happening there. As always, safe farming.